They don't know what we have things. They don't know that we have things that we can detect in the dark that work very well. We have that. It was them that did it. That's an amazing series of sentences right there. They don't know that we have things that we can detect in the dark that work very well. We have that. It was them that did it. American officials released video on Thursday that they said showed an Iranian boat crew hours after the attack removing a limpet mine attached to the hull of the damaged Kokuya Courageous, a tanker operated by the Japanese company Kokuya Sangyo. But Yutaka Katada, the company's president, citing accounts from the ship's crew, said Friday, "I do not think there was a time bomb or an object attached to the side of the ship." Obviously they lay out that a tracking point of the ships, the other ships involved. They lay out tracking points of the Iranian ships and of the Japanese ships and where they are, and at the timing they can actually see them. They have satellite tracking and GPS on these boats. Mr. Pompeo did not say that mines had caused the two holes in the tanker's hull that were visible in photographs released by the American military. So he's not as sold on this, apparently, as the president is. Senior American officials have said that mines were used in attacks last month on 4 ships in the same area, which the United States has also accused Iran of carrying out. Our crew said that the ship was attacked by a flying object, Mr. Katada said of the incident on Thursday. Now, this is also one of those situations where the reasoning behind this, the logic of attacking Japanese tankers to as economic terrorism, honestly, it begs the question. It's a lot like the Syrian gas attacks and the like, where you really have to. It is not automatic that the official story is false. However, there are elements of it that are very concerning. And after our experience with Yellow Cake and the Iraq War, I think everybody is reasonably suspicious every time this stuff comes up. We should have been beforehand, but we certainly should be now, right? The concern about this is that it is in a constant state of ratcheting up, and it may be one of those, and it is being swamped by a lot of other news. So on Friday, meanwhile, as other nations like China called for an easing of tension in the region, Yemen's Houthi faction launched its second attack in days against an airport in Saudi Arabia. The Saudis led a coalition that is fighting the Houthis, who are backed by Iran in Yemen's civil war. A Houthi television channel said the group had launched a drone attack on Abha International Airport, where while the Saudi military said it had intercepted 5 Houthi drones and the airport was operating normally. The Saudis said 26 people were injured in a Houthi strike on the same airport on Wednesday. This is and the Houthis said the attack was carried out by using a cruise missile. This is nothing new as far as tensions in the Middle East between warring and fighting factions of Muslims and sort of a. I think we get too tied up in the tribal differences between Muslim groups. In reality, a lot of what's going on in the Middle East is simply economic and resource warfare, no different than the economic and resource wars that Europe had in a lot of ways, under the mask of religion as its point, right? So, and Bruce asks a question in the chat room: was the ship carrying Iranian oil? I don't know the answer to that, and there doesn't. I looked that up, and I was not able to see anything in there that particularly pointed to that. But ultimately, it kind of doesn't matter. The idea would be that if they're blowing up their own oil, one would think that they would make a case that someone else was sabotaging them economically, and then they could make a case to the UN or whatever. Either way, okay, Leonard is saying no, it wasn't in there. I think that's in relation to the same question. This is an ongoing concern, and again, I think requires more attention than it is getting from a lot of people, and largely because we're being swamped by other news. And we'll be talking about some of that other news as we go. But when it comes time to start calling our congressperson and our senator and saying this is incredibly dangerous and foolhardy, and and a pointless war based on the destruction of a deal that was actually functioning. We're all going to be. I worry that we are going to be behind the 8 ball on this one, on expressing that concern, because there are so many other fires to be put out a lot of times. So, this is one of the underlying stories that's going on, and the shifts in the bond market, where the Fed has been shedding $50 billion worth of bonds over the last per month for the last 16 months or so, which is signs that they are worried about a slowdown in the economy that shows them trying to manage the potential for a recession that's coming because of China's economic slowdown and because of European economic slowdowns, elements because of Brexit. Obviously, just the pork industry alone in China is being hit by a sort of a form of pig Ebola. That it's an African pig virus that is going to make them kill over a third of their pigs that they have, which both increases their need for pigs from our market, and at a time when tariffs make that very difficult for them, but also simply the loss of, there's so many people there to feed that the loss of that amount of livestock is incredibly dangerous for that country and for their economic outlook. So the Fed is looking at those things long term and saying, 8 months out, we're in a very dangerous position. Now, Republicans are big fans of running up a bunch of military debt, getting us into a bunch of messes all over the world, and then leaving it for the next Dem to clean up. And this is Trump talking about his Fed pick, and I want you to see if you notice one of the deals, the biggest element of what he's talking about, his concern over his Fed pick. There's 10 of them, but here.
We have great numbers. The companies are very strong. They're very liquid. If we had a different person in the Federal Reserve that wouldn't have raised interest rates so much, we would have been at least 1.5 points higher. 3.2 is good. He's my pick. I agree. But, we also have people in there that weren't my pick. But he's my pick, and I disagree with him entirely.
So, he's not my pick, and even though he's my pick, but those choices are being made by other people. But I disagree with him entirely. So obviously, he agrees with those other people. And this idea that there have been 50, he's seen a 50% rise in the stock market since he came in office. I don't know how many times I have to say this, but when Barack Obama came into office, the stock market was at 6,400. And when Barack Obama left office, it was at 19,000 plus. Donald Trump would have to have the kind of growth he's seen in the last 2 years for 10 years to see that same level of growth in the stock market as Obama had. And Obama did it literally when someone handed him a bomb he had to defuse in terms of an economic crisis. Something of which, by the way, Donald Trump is completely unprepared for. And both intellectually and morally, and you can tell by the reports coming out that he just says we'll just print more money. He literally said that out loud, which is, by the way, one of the biggest complaints that with quantitative easing the Republicans had against Barack Obama in an attempt to goose the economy when it was flagging. To keep the recession from becoming a depression, one of the tools you use to do that is quantitative easing. The Republicans were against it, and now they're for it. And there are two huge reasons why Donald Trump has enjoyed some of the economic benefits that he has had during three. One is the steady rate of growth over the last 10 years. And the fact, by the way, that the economy is where it is right now is where it would have been 6 years ago had the Bush administration not capsized it. Had Hank Paulson not overseen the near collapse of the mortgage industry over the course of the 8 years he was in office, that Bush was in office. That's why, And with or without Barack Obama attempting to improve our investment in renewables and improve Americans' chances of having not going bankrupt because of healthcare bills, those kind of things, those beneficial things to the economy that would have come about, would have been incredibly valuable and would have inflated the economy and benefited everyone. However, they wouldn't have been as necessary without the recession. And the idea that on their way out the door, a lot of Republicans, the best thing they can do is pull some sort of ripcord on a problem that they've created, because then they can argue if from even a minority position and hamstring the majority in the next round, saying, well, we can't afford more social safety net. We can't afford to protect people who need food stamps or people on disability. We can't afford that. And well, the reason we can't afford that is because you dumped $3 trillion in the Middle East on a lie. The reason we can't afford that is because you increasingly work to deregulate the mortgage market so that people could literally make up fictitious money-making schemes, but create a game of three-card Monte around the biggest investment most people have in their lives, which is their home. So, on their way out the door, just tank it, because that's a good way to guarantee that the social programs and the kind of things that working people care about, that Democrats are largely focused on, can't get done at the level they would because the tax dollars are not there and the debt's too high. Then they get back in, and the debt doesn't matter anymore. Then I have to rebuild the military. This is, that was his argument. Trump, his big thing about his Fed pick is, Stephanopoulos says, well, you're the debt's going up under you too, and he goes, well, I had a depleted military. I had to build it back up. Yeah, it was only only 6 times larger than all the other militaries in the world combined, and now it's 7 times larger. So anyways, we got to take a break. We'll be back right after this. It's the Hal Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide on WCPT Radio, Chicago's Progressive Talk. I'm gonna just trust this guy. I'm not gonna switch to the other thing. Since that's working, I'm not going anywhere. And I think we've got a decent stream quality now. We shall see. I think it's one of those things where I got to go on the air an hour beforehand. Oh, what happened? Please try again. What error happened? I'm streaming. What's going on? What are you talking about? This is I'm live. What's going on? Oh, good. Okay, thank God. We need, this is why I need patrons. We need to be able to hire a producer and who can run the camera stuff and make all that stuff work. Does YouTube have a prostate problem? Yes, they do. This is one of those days, man. I'm about to declare from July of this year to July of next year, the 2019 into 2020, as we go into the campaign, the year of living digitally. So that instead, because I'm, obviously I have a lot of touring going on. Both have weak streams. As my goal has been to improve all this stuff, and then I'm always ice skating uphill against this, and it's so funny how maybe it's because I'm doing 2 things at once, doing the radio and the stream at the same time or whatever. But it's amazing how well you can get some stuff to just stream straight with a phone, and then everything else, when you've got full-fledged gear, everything's... But I'm not going to get too upset because, quite frankly, stream-wise, but for these ruffles... this time, it's been better over the last couple of weeks. So obviously this is an outlier. I don't want to get too thrown into because there was this old Tony Robbins bit where he had and something was wrong with his mic on stage, and every time he walked over, there was this like knight in the suit of armor on stage, like a prop, and every time he got near it, his mic would act up, and everybody eventually was like, "It's the knight." It was like people were watching Punch and Judy,
5 seconds.
Okay, thank you. And then he went over once, and it didn't, and it turned out it was just cop cars going by. All right, Carl.
This is Doris Davenport, host of The Doris Davenport Show, all local, all the time. I'm on every Saturday morning from 10 to 11, right before Hal Sparks. Now let's get back to Hal Sparks' radio program, Mega Worldwide.
Welcome back to Hal Sparks' radio program, Mega Worldwide, now in 1440 baud. That's right. I got a brand new 56K modem as a gift of the Super Chats and Carl and our patrons. So I think we should be locked in. If you guys don't mind hearing every time we go to break. Other than that, it should be completely fine. We should be great. So the president is concerned that the Fed chief is into quantitative tightening. It's not my choice, but he wants to do what they call quantitative tightening. Which is largely, a financial made-up term because easing had been going on for so long. They wanted a way to throw back against the quantitative, normalizing any of this stuff. This is, let's see, Matt Phillips is writing, anyone paying attention to financial markets in recent months know that the Federal Reserve's management of the economy was perhaps the single most important question on the minds of investors. The Fed, of course, has been raising interest rates, including 4 increases last year, which unnerved many investors. These days, though, and by the way, I understand that you can't, if you're borrowing money to start a business or those kind of things, that a lower interest rate is great for that, and it spurs growth in those regards. But it also undermines any long-term savings investment to the people who are loaning that money out en masse by having bank accounts. The banks can make whatever they want off that baseline, depending on whether or not, if the Fed is loaning them, money at 2%. And they're loaning it out at anywhere between 4 and 19%, depending on what they think the risk is. The variance for them in going to, 4% on that, they just end up ratcheting it up, and some people will get priced out of that market. They're not going to wait and make the same profit margin on, trying to loan people money at 22 or 23%. So they're just going to lose the more risky loans, essentially. But the cheaper loans themselves, the ones that they can count on, that goes up for the people involved. You're paying 8% instead of 6%. But the people who actually invest the money, the people who put their money in the bank that the bank is actually loaning out, make more on their savings investment and can count on that long term instead of risking it on the stock market. Or other investment schemes or scratchers, for Christ's sake. So the reality is that this balancing act has some worth to it, and raising interest rates for people who are trying to save money, it benefits those folks. And right, in the last 30 years, we've been in a very gambling structure kind of a way. And it's why we have a guy who bankrupted a casino, running things, currently. Players in the markets have bestowed the Fed's bond shedding policy with its own very own nickname, quantitative tightening, or QT. Cutie. Isn't that adorable? So what is quantitative tightening? How's it supposed to work? It doesn't. It's a nickname they made up for normalizing these things. During normal times, short-term interest rates have a strong influence on how much it costs consumers and companies to borrow money. But during the financial crisis, the Fed's rate cuts barely budged longer-term borrowing rates, which stayed stubbornly high. Investors were so spooked that they refused to put their money into anything other than super safe short-term government bonds. The Fed needed to push longer-term investment rates down. With short-term rates at their lowest possible levels, the central bank went looking for new tools. That's how quantitative easing was born. In 2009, Feds started buying immense quantities of bonds, trying to drive their prices up and their rates down. By 2014, the Fed was the proud owner of roughly $2.5 trillion worth of Treasury bonds. That's a big portion of our debt, by the way. And more than $1.5 trillion of government-backed mortgage bonds. Did it work? Yes, it did. The Fed's bond buying didn't immediately cure every economic ill brought on by the recession. The United States would limp through nearly a decade of sluggish growth, even as the Fed continued to devour bonds. But the consensus among investors and policymakers is that all of the bond purchases helped push key borrowing rates. This was a good thing over time. At that, because we were nearly in a recession, such as those for 30-year fixed-rate mortgages and for corporate bonds to their lowest levels in a generation. That made loans at least a little more affordable and offered some support to the fragile economy. In the stock and bond markets, the power of the Fed's campaign was even more pronounced. By pumping trillions of dollars into the financial system, quantitative easing prepped up the value of stocks, bonds, and all sorts of other assets. Few in the markets think it is a coincidence that the beginning of QE was also the beginning of the longest bull market in history. So that, and it goes to, it seems logical that quantitative tightening, the inversion of this policy, will lead to a bear market, and that's what they're worried about. A decade later, the economy is in much better shape. Unemployment is the lowest level in decades. Early data indicates the economy last year grew at its fastest clip since 2005. Wages are even starting to rise. To the central bank, those rosy economic signs meant it was time to start removing some of the scaffolding it had erected to support the crumbling economy, and that's where the tightening comes in. You may have also noted that the financial markets were battered last year. Almost every type of investment seemed to suffer some lackluster returns. S&P 500 was down by 6.2%. High-quality corporate bonds sank 6.4%. U.S. Treasury bonds generated a paltry 0.9% return. Collapse in crude oil prices sent commodities down more than 15%. In fact, it was the first time in decades that virtually all major classes of investments suffered in sync. The concern over QT flared in December as stock markets swung wildly. Jerome Powell, the Fed chairman, played down the chance that the central bank would change its approach to its steady bond reductions, which he described as being on automatic pilot. The stock market sank by 6% in the days after that statement. So this stabilization has got to happen at some point. Otherwise, you're just pushing things higher up to a cliff. And all the graphs that have ever been made around this kind of stuff always end up to the point where if the bond market reaches up, the Fed funds rate reaches over 5%, it flatlines and we go into a recession. And that's why they can kind of see a recession coming around the corner. And the goal is to manage that growth so that it never gets spiked up to that point. And you might end up getting up to 5% at some point, but staying at 2.5%, but keeping a higher volume. Point being is that as the world economy shifts around us, and as the growth of kind of the global economy creates a different strata levels that everybody can operate on, and that smooths out over time. You will get to know what the economy actually is like. You'll get to find out. No, this is this, because I'm of the theory, and I think a lot of people are of the theory, that we don't actually know what kind of economy we could possibly have, because the world is changing so swiftly. There has been a clear sign that in terms of how America. Our economy has globalized, how we have outsourced a lot of our production to other countries, how we have accepted cheaper goods from other countries, designed here, licensed and created here, but physically made in other countries for a lot of different reasons, not the least of which is, environmental reasons. Because a lot of the things that we enjoy, technologically especially, have a chemical cost to them, and there's a huge concern that chemical cost, has long-term health damaging effects, leads to cancer clusters and all kinds of other stuff, and that usually gets centered around poor communities in the United States. Look at Mississippi and Alabama, for example. Michigan and the environmental decay that happens around those areas, we have outsourced that to other countries and moved into sort of the economic management version of that, that economic strategy. The question is, can you maintain that, and can everyone in the country benefit from that, or just a maintenance, sort of a managerial class of people in the country while everyone else goes broke? We got to take a break. We'll be back after this. So I'm sorry if the is it streaming, because I can't tell from the graphics on this thing if it's. Can you see me? Can you hear me? Chat room? Are you there? Is everybody in? Is everybody in? We're okay now? Okay, excellent. Phew. It makes me worry. Thank you, Hal Vickery. I appreciate it, brother. Can see and hear. Good. Terrific. So, yeah, so I think what's going to happen is, the blurry part is I'm lowering the bit rate on the video just to make sure it gets through, because I think, and now it's buffering, of course, so it didn't help. Picture is soft, but okay. All right. I lowered that bit rate so that I could check and see if it was simply just internet here. So, brief gap. Yeah, that was me turning it off and back on. So, and sometimes, again, sometimes I hit at this and then it's just the streaming stuff on YouTube. Never freezes with Al's eyes closed. I'm going to go inside real quick. I'll be right back. I'm going to make sure that there's no extra digital streaming going on in the house that doesn't need to happen. I'll be right back, guys. We will see if that helped. Fingers crossed. Hopefully. Hopefully we've got a picture. Who can say we don't know? I don't know if it'll work, but we will try our level best. One of these days I'll get this whole thing sorted out, I promise, and we'll have a real show. My look at that. So much better. My mom and Camden were watching YouTube videos of babies falling down stairs. We are live. Yes, it's true. We need, let's see. That's actually a great point, Pamela. We'll bring that up when we come back. Drink. Maybe YouTube is partnering with established news organizations for a really alternative source for news. That part. We are actually live. Are they coming to see the show tonight? Yes, they will be there. McConnell thinks Deripaska has saved him. McConnell's not wrong. Okay. I feel bad asking people to like and subscribe when the feed is all crappy. It's terrible. Yeah, you know those Robin, those baby shows. Like those compilation videos on YouTube of babies being, running into walls or hitting people in the crotch with a tennis racket. Thanks. Can't stop lying. The funny part is after we get, it's sort of the companion of streaming with the tie line and the show that messes with everything. So hold on. We'll try this in a second. There you go. Put this
15
up.
seconds.
Excellent. Thank you. Put that in the corner. Pop that chat out. Put it over here. Get rid of this one.
You're listening to the Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide.
I've had people walk out of me before, but not when I was being so charming.
Video streaming at halsparks.com.
I don't care for you or for the putrid sludge you're troweling out.
Damn puss-faced little pimp stick.
True progressive talk.
Might be a good time for you guys to give up.
Welcome back to the show. So, always the second hour, always the one where we sort of can get into a groove, except on the days when it craps out in the tail end and then we get stuck. It's always difficult, but we're always here, and I appreciate you guys soldiering through it with us. It's the Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide on WCPT Radio, and we stream at infotainmentwars.com, which is the YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe. Think about, if you're as frustrated as I am by our technical difficulties, consider becoming a Patreon subscriber, because that is where those funds will go. We are saving up to buy some gear that will replace the stuff that we use that is, let's just say, not substandard, but of an alternate standard. Let's just be kind, I suppose. So we talked about a little bit in the first hour about Trump's concern that his idea that he is to be. I'm trying to even grasp. His Fed chairman is his pick, but he disagrees with him entirely. But it's not his fault, because there's other people on the Fed that that Jerome Powell agrees with, so Trump doesn't like what he's doing. Then there's Don McGahn, who is the president's attorney, who is trying to show that he's a good attorney by telling Mueller, by perjuring himself and telling Mueller that the president broke the law and tried to obstruct justice in attempting to fire Mueller to show unlisted other people, like unnamed other humans, that he was a good lawyer. Presumably to get more legal work in the future from people that he will cover for their crimes before I don't understand. I mean, it's baffling. So Trump obviously got into it. Oh, and by the way, Kellyanne Conway it's been recommended by the special counsel's office that she be fired. Trump called, by the way, to clean up all this nonsense, unsuccessfully, by the way, called into Fox and Friends to sort of fix the, of course I would take help from a foreign company. I'd look at it, sure. I mean, who calls the FBI? I've never called, no one would call the FBI. He calls in. He obviously got the news. Like the phone rang off the hook, and everybody went, "Whoa, whoa, 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 guy! You can't tell people." I mean, I don't think it was the McConnells of the world. It wasn't McCarthy. It may have been his own attorney. There might have been somebody in there. It's hard to say who made that emergency phone call or who he would even take that call from. Is the incredible part. Like in what part? Because I can't picture any of these Republicans speaking to him honestly. So at what point, I don't know that anybody knows which Republicans called him, but definitely someone reached the president, and he called in Fox and Friends. Well, what was supposed to be a 10-minute phone call to celebrate John McCain Day, which is so interesting that it's on the same day as Trump's birthday. I don't know how that worked out, but that's amazing. And so if you haven't wished him a belated John McCain Day, I would recommend that. But Trump calls into Fox and Friends to kind of clean up what was going on, and the other related story where his polls came out. He had gotten a bunch of internal polls saying that he's underwater in 15 of 17 battleground states that he won, and he's within the margin of error in Texas, which is a nightmare for any normal Republican. So he calls in, he pushes back on those with Stephanopoulos. He calls into Fox and Friends. So Kellyanne Conway has been accused of violating the Hatch Act. It's obvious that she did. And his defense of her, again, is rudimentary at best, cartoonish. Well, here it is.
Well, I got briefed on it yesterday, and it looks to me like they're trying to take away her right of free speech, and that's just not fair. They ask a question. I think one of them was in your show, but you ask them a question, or you ask a person a question, and every time you're supposed to say, I can't answer. Yes. I mean, she's got to have the right of responding to questions. It really sounds to me like a free speech thing. It doesn't sound fair.
So you're not going to fire her, Mr.
President?
You're not going to fire her?
No, I'm not going to fire her. I think she's a terrific person. She's a tremendous spokesperson. She's just a great person. I would certainly not think, based on what I saw yesterday, how could you do that? They have tried to take away her speech, and I think you're entitled to free speech in this country.
Right, yeah, they just say if you're working for the White House, you shouldn't be involved in criticizing other candidates or other politicians, and she urged her not to do that going forward?
Well, but it doesn't work that way, because let's say that I think Biden was one of the people that she was accused of criticizing, but he criticized me, and we then criticized him, or she criticized him, and she's making a point. She's trying to make a point. And how could you do this? Basically, you'd have to take a person off. A person wouldn't be able to express themselves. And I just don't see it. Now, I'm going to get a very strong briefing on it, and I'll see. But it seems to me to be very unfair. Right. It's called free speech.
It's called free speech. He does this. It's called Oppo research. It's called quantitative tightening. Like he brands and labels these kind of things, and it's sad that it actually functionally works for a lot of people, that they get caught up in that brand, and but okay, let's just be abundantly clear. You have the right to speech. You do not have the right to a microphone. You also do not have the right to use taxpayer dollars to support your speech over someone else's. And so when you work for the White House and you are the spokesperson for the White House and for the president, you do not get to use that pulpit and the multiple avenues to express yourself, the guaranteed news coverage that you get from that for campaigning. And when that stuff comes up, you simply defer to the campaign. This idea that he's like, what's she supposed to do? Just not say stuff? She can defer to the campaign to talk about those issues. And if she wants free speech to speak freely on his behalf, she can quit the White House and go to work for the campaign. She has the ability to do this. She just does not have the right to use every taxpayer's dollars in her salary equally. This is, by the way, the same way I think the whole I don't have to serve gays or Jews or minorities of any sort or Lutherans, whatever your particular bigotry would be, is because I have the right to my own establishment. It's my store. I don't have to serve anybody in it. Well, guess what? Everyone's taxes pay for the street lights that your customers use to not die on the way to your business. We all share in the costs of sewage. We all share in the costs of roads. We all share in all those costs. And you don't get to bifurcate out who's allowed in the door of your shop where you sell things, because they don't get to separate, corral their tax dollars away from you. That's right, Brad. I said Lutherans. That's right. So if you're going to have a bakery and you're like, I don't want to bake cakes for gay couples, tough. No one can make you do your best work on it. And it should be edible and say what it says they want it to say on there. But the idea that you can have the tax dollars everyone else pays for, street lights and water and hurricane and tornado relief that allowed the neighborhood to continue to exist, all of that. This is obviously an incredibly, it's in the reeds. A lot of people don't care that much about the Hatch Act, and they should, but it is certainly small potatoes compared to the extraordinary level of graft and corruption going on with Ivanka and Jared and Trump himself with his hotels and taxpayers paying for Mar-a-Lago and all that stuff. That by comparison to that, this is small potatoes. But the long-term damage of letting it go undermines our democracy, which is, by the way, if Putin has a goal, that's it. It's tribalism, it's us fighting each other, and it's the breakdown of the normal regulations and laws that have made our democracy function. We'll take a break and we'll come right back after this, and we'll talk about some of that tribalism. We're going to talk about that because the 2020 debates are going to be in just a couple of weeks. What's that going to mean for a bruised Democrat going into the general election? We'll see. I think, all right. Yeah. Let's see this. I don't know why the buffering. God damn it. It's buffering because I have I need to, I think it partly might be just using that. The neighborhood internet is being weird. Is it getting better?
Yeah, I think we're being hacked.
Yeah. I wouldn't doubt it sometimes because it's so specific. And
Yes, I noticed when you touched up on a certain subject, there you go.
Yeah. If I start talking about stuff, that's when they come for me. It's so aggravating. But it doesn't matter. We'll stay at it. I'm just too easy to hit. That's the thing. Oh, this is offline now. That's terrible.